Figure it out, Phil. Hello. Say something.
Hello.
Okay. Thank you so much for making the time for us tonight. I know you're very busy. I was telling the class how you're retired, but not really, because you're teaching all kinds.
I'm really retired. I number one, I get a pension. Number two, which all the troglodytes in the United States are trying to take away old people's pensions, but I get a pension from the state of Illinois, and I don't have to go to faculty meetings or meet with the dean. So I'm completely retired in that sense. But I also am teaching. I teach in 4 places, and the reason I'm in the back room because my students are out in my living room, because we had a potluck tonight and they haven't left yet. So if you hear noisy students in the other room, that's my students finishing off the dinner. But I now teach at Lake Forest College, where I teach curriculum and teaching. I teach at Stateville Prison is my main teaching job. I teach memoir writing. I teach at the University of Chicago, where I teach oral history. And I teach ethics at DePaul University, which is a Catholic school here in Chicago. It's a Vincentian, a school of the Vincentian order. And I got to say, hats off to a Catholic university that hires somebody like me to teach ethics. I mean, it's a stretch, but they did it. So here I am.
That gives me faith.
Yeah. See, now that's what they wanted. I think it was part of a trick. They wanted people like Mark Spooner to get the faith.
Yeah, and then I got the faith I need to get the faith.
That's good. But honestly, I have more fun teaching ethics at this university, and the students are but here's what's interesting, Mark. My students at the University of Chicago tend to be kids from very wealthy backgrounds, 18, 19 years old. My students at Stateville Prison tend to be 40s and 50s and 60s, and they want to learn how to write memoirs. And then I have everybody in between. But what's great about that, from my point of view, is that as a teacher, you always have to figure out ways to learn from your students. I can learn a lot from these 18-year-olds many of them are overseas students. They're not US citizens. They're from South Asia, East Asia, Europe, and they're just terrific. And they have a lot of great energy. And my students at Stateville Prison, who are in their 40s and 50s, are phenomenally bright, interested, educated, and they're not checking a box. When you're in prison, if you're taking a class like how to write a memoir, you're serious about it. You want to learn how to write. So they show up. And so I'm learning a lot from all my students. And you're right, I'm working, but I'm officially retired from the University of Illinois at Chicago. So that's why I say I am retired, but I'm not tired. I'm not done.
I'm not going to make you look at me all night. I'm going to show you my students here.
Oh, I wanted to look at you all night, Mark. My goodness.
You can always see me later, but I have a fine group of students in the class here. It's a graduate class, of course, the one that you've been a guest at many times, Social Justice and Globalization from an educational perspective. And we have a large group. I think there are 23 students, and I'm just going to pan around to show you, and maybe they could say a quick hi as we go around. Would that be all right?
That'd be wonderful. Hello.
You can say hi if you want to.
You're on the big screen.
There we go. I don't know where I rest this thing. Not there. Okay, we'll go. I'll pan it around. I'll move it around.
And are you all doctoral students, master's students? Are you veteran teachers? Give me just a sense.
Sure. Someone put up their hand and explain. Okay,
you all have different experiences. So I've been teaching I'm in my 18th year, and I'm a master's student.
Great.
I went to school late. So.
They're all doctoral or graduate or master's students.
And in your 18 years, what levels do you teach?
I've taught everything from grade 2 up to grade 9.
You're like me. I started in preschool. I started in Head Start, which was a program in the U.S. kind of in the wake of the civil rights movement. I started in Head Start and worked my way all the way to graduate school. And I like to think that I was following my own children. As they got older, I kept getting to higher grades because I have a problem with separation. So I just had to keep going. So I wouldn't leave them. Anyway, it's good. Great to meet you. Who else?
Okay.
Tell me who they are.
Anybody
Anybody?
else want to say hi? All right, here we
Be
go.
brave. Be brave.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm actually in my 8th year of teaching, so a little bit different, and I've taught anywhere from grades 3 to 8, so a little bit of a narrower perspective. And I just am backing my master's degree on an inclusive ed certificate here at the university as well.
You have a favorite age group that you've taught?
I am a preferred of the preteens, the hormonal preteens. Grade 6, 7 is where it's at.
You know, it's funny. There are so many arguments. I mean, you know, we're all different. We all love different things. I felt so blessed to be able to teach preschool. I love little kids. They're so fun and they're learning with all 5 senses. But man, I agree with you. I love adolescence. I love pre-adolescence. I love, you know, but then again, I love the middle years when they're done with the storms of early childhood and preceding the storms of adolescence. They have these big brains, but they're very calm. You know, 3rd graders, 2nd graders, they're amazing. So lucky you. And then again, I love graduate students. Now I'm looking at you all and I'm loving you. So I would love to, you know, I mean, what's not to love, right? But teaching is a great, you know, one of the great things about teaching, and I bet you all have felt this off and on, but is the sense of, you know, being in the adventurous company of young people, and not just young people, but people who are learning and people who are, you know, committed to learning. So as I say, my students in Stateville Prison, I said they're not checking a box, they're there to learn. And boy, did they show up. And it makes a huge difference to me as a teacher that they are there to really dig in and go deep and be critical and be thoughtful. So it's a great profession, you know, the one we all share. Okay, thank you. That's great. What do you want to do?
Some more want to say hello to you first, though. A couple more want to say hello.
Bangladesh, the South Asian country. I've been teaching biology for 12 years, and the age group of the student is very sensitive, as you told, that is in between 15 and 21. So I have that kind of experience, you know, diverse kind of experience. So I decided to do Master's of Education, so that I can apply to.
From Bangladesh, if you didn't hear.
Yeah.
Yes, I did hear. Yeah, great.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
Hi, you're done?
Yeah.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Crystal. I'm also a teacher, and I've been teaching grade 4, 5, and 6. My favorite is grade 5, and I am currently a PhD student.
Great. Great.
Anybody else while I'm panning around? All right, well, one of the questions that, well, one of the ways we might proceed, one, I wanted to say first, it's a real honor and a privilege to have you join us, Bill. I really appreciate it. I know how busy you are, and I know how committed you are to community work. And so it's a real honor to have someone like you come in. I've discussed and read many of your works, and the students are fascinated, one, by the theory and your work as an educator, also your commitment as an activist. We spent the last hour talking about you. If your ears were burning in a good way, we were exploring the many dimensions of your sort of becoming or awakening and what you've done in your life to date. And one of the questions that came up, I was going to say it's mine, but a student over here with the baseball cap, we thought maybe it'd be neat to get you to talk about what's your theory of change, Bill? Like, what's your theory of change? How do we make change happen? And has it changed through your lifetime? Or you can just tell us about what you're thinking about in terms of democracy, education, and whatever else is on your mind.
Okay, well, let's talk a minute about theory of change. You know, I'm a huge believer that a theory that doesn't get tried out in practice isn't very useful. You know, I often go back to Karl Marx's, you know, there's a phrase that he used that's apparently on his gravestone, and the phrase is, up until now, philosophers have tried to describe the world, but the point is to change it. And I agree so profoundly with that. I get very, you know, very much part of the social movements in the United States, very active to this day. That's why, even though I'm retired from the University of Illinois, I'm still doing the work that I do. But I think that too often people get caught up in their theories and they don't take the time to try to activate them in the real world. So I'll tell you, so that's prelude. Another prelude is this. Samuel Beckett, in one of his plays, has this great line that's been repeated many times by many different people. And the line is something like, try, fail, try again, fail better. And that's kind of my philosophy of social change. You try things, you fail, you try again, you fail again, and you fail better. You try to learn from the things that you have been doing. So I can give you one example, even though I'm a little worried that I'm going to be not only US centric, but Chicago centric. And so I apologize in advance. I'm a Chicago chauvinist and I love Chicago. I wish you all would move here and teach in our schools and help us fight the good fight. But Chicago, over the last 10 years, we've had so many important movements. Let me back up and say, these important movements in Chicago don't come out of nowhere. So everything builds on something else. But a lot of people, and maybe some of you, are feeling this tremendous despair or discouragement about the many crises that we're facing in our lives and how they overlap and how they seem to be intractable. We don't seem to be able to do anything about it. So we have the crisis of racial reckoning in the United States and in Canada, the crisis of reckoning with the indigenous population of Canada and the United States, the crisis of the environment, which threatens to overwhelm us all, the crisis of credibility. What is truth? What is truthiness? All these things are coming together, and we feel like we're just, what can we do sometimes? But then we have to remind ourselves that while this is the worst of times on some level, it's also the best of times. In my country, we had just a few years ago, 26 million people pour into the streets, demanding racial reckoning, demanding racial justice. That's never happened in my lifetime until then. What an amazing thing. Not only in Chicago and New York and San Francisco, where you would expect some kind of response, but in Keokuk, Iowa, in Des Moines, Iowa, you know, in Oklahoma. I mean, everywhere I went, there was an outpouring of outrage at the kind of mindless serial murder of Black people. And that's so encouraging. Not only is that encouraging, but the attack on women, which is coming from all directions, but certainly from our Supreme Court, doing away with a woman's right to control her own body, giving women's bodies back into the hands of the state. But then we have to look at the other side and see that women are not accepting that. Women are not saying, "Oh, I'll go back into some medieval definition of my rights." And then the environment, we're facing extraordinary, catastrophic capitalist climate collapse, and at the same time, we've never seen so much consciousness, so much activity to save the possibility of life on Earth. So I think Charles Dickens would be very familiar with what we're going through, which is, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It's a season of darkness, it's a season of light. It's the season of despair and the season of hope. So I tend to think that we should never get stuck, never get enthralled by the terribleness that's going on. We should always ask ourselves, okay, once we painted a picture of objective conditions, what should we do? What can we do? And people often say to me, well, what can one person do? And there's truth to that, but the Short answer is one person can link up with another person. Then you have two people, and two people can link up with two more people. Then you have four people. So my theory of change is this, Mark. That's all prelude. My theory of change is that the only real change that comes about that has any meaning in pushing humanity forward is change that comes from below. That is, you have to have a movement of lots of people, let's call it masses of people in motion is what changes things. And I apologize for being stuck in my American examples, but I'll give you a couple of American examples. The clearest to me is the American Civil War, which you know something about. Don't you know something about the American Civil War? Nod
Oh, yeah.
vigorously so I can see you. Okay, good. Are you nodding? I don't see. Are you saying?
They're nodding, they're nodding.
Yes.
Some are
Well, here's something you may not know about the American Civil War. Well, let me start this way. Think of yourself as an abolitionist in 1850. You were against slavery, you were struggling against slavery, but did you really believe that in 10 years or 13 years that slavery would be gone? Slavery was actually fundamental to this country. It was what the whole economy was based on everywhere, not just in Mississippi, but in New York at the stock exchange and so on. So how could you imagine? And then you work and work and work, you try, you fail, you try again, you fail better. And then you get this Republican, this crazy election happens, and Lincoln gets elected. Nobody in an American school knows what Lincoln's first inaugural address says. And the reason we don't know is because it's a disaster. We all study Lincoln's second inaugural address, the one he gave after the Emancipation Proclamation. So I'll just tell me if I'm losing you completely, because I don't want to completely lose you. But in his first inaugural address in 1860, Lincoln said, "I am not opposed to slavery. I do not intend to interfere with the institution of slavery. It's not legally possible for me to intervene, and I'm not inclined to intervene." And you read the first inaugural address, say, "Wait, Abe Lincoln, what a disappointment. I thought you were against slavery." Well, that's because you read the second inaugural address 4 years later. What happened in those 4 years? Well, the South seceded, the Civil War began, and suddenly there was a crisis of monumental proportions, and Lincoln rose to the moment. The second inaugural address could have been written, and may well have been written, by the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, because in the second inaugural address, he says, "Every drop of blood brought about by the lash shall be answered by blood drawn by the sword." Holy crap. And then he talks about reparations, and you're like, your head explodes, and you say, "Man, Abe Lincoln, you met the moment, dude." And then he was assassinated. And then, of course, if you follow American history at all, we had a moment of Black Reconstruction in the South. And one thing of note to you as education students is that W.E.B. Du Bois, the great thinker and historian and sociologist, Du Bois said, we should always remember that public education is a Negro idea. And that's true. It was Black Reconstruction that brought about the idea of public education. And that was a radical idea, and it spread from the South to the North. But it's worth remembering that. So I tell you all that little bit of history to say this. Lincoln did not act simply out of the goodness of his brain. He acted in response to fire from below. He acted in response to something going on underneath. So slave rebellions were happening throughout the institution of slavery. But in the 1840s and 50s, they became absolutely unstoppable. All over Virginia, enslaved workers were rising up. And then the Haitian Revolution brought the slavers in Virginia to their knees, because they thought, holy cow, when are we going to get our due? And they knew it was coming. But it was the work of the abolitionists, it was the work of the enslaved workers freeing themselves that brought about the crisis that Lincoln responded to. I'll give you two other hopelessly American examples, but I don't have any good Canadian examples, so you have to fill me in. But Lyndon Johnson, who passed the most far-reaching civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. He was a president in the early 1960s and in early mid 1960s. Lyndon Johnson brought about all this great social legislation, civil rights legislation, but he was not a leader of the civil rights movement. He was a relatively socially conservative guy from Texas. What happened? Well, the country was in flames. Martin Luther King didn't ask to meet with Johnson. Johnson asked to meet with King. And the reason was because there was a social revolution happening. So my theory of change is if you don't organize masses of people to create an unstoppable, or not necessarily unstoppable, but to open the space where revolution can be imagined, then you're not doing your job. The job is masses of people in motion. One last president to mention is Franklin Roosevelt, who's another very famous president. He passed the most far-reaching labor legislation in history, in American history, but he did not operate. He was a patrician from the Hudson Valley of New York. He was not a radical labor leader. He was responding to a labor movement that made that kind of revolutionary change irresistible. And I think that's what we have. That's my theory of change, that you have to be willing to, I'll put it this way, you have to believe in fire from below as a kind of a theory. And then you have to walk toward change on two legs. One leg is the leg of social movements. That is the leg of mobilizing large numbers of people. And the other leg is real politics. So I'm very happy to have a Bernie Sanders in the Senate when we need things done. I'm very happy to have Brandon Johnson as our mayor in Chicago. He was an organizer for the Chicago Teachers Union, and he came out of that to become mayor. So I'm very happy he's there, but he's not going to bring about change without us. It's only us. It's only the people at the bottom who can not only generate the kind of freedom dreams of what we want to see, but it's really acting on behalf of the most oppressed that we get the kind of social changes that we need to move human progress forward. That's my theory of change in a nutshell. Sorry.
Love it. That's a great theory of change. We have a bunch of questions for you.
I want those questions. Good.
Do you want to move to that now, or do you want to tell us what keeps you up at night and what keeps you hopeful?
Well, I mean, partly what keeps me up at night is everything. I mean, we're facing an absolute catastrophe. And if the environment doesn't scare the shit out of you, then you're not paying attention. In fact, I often think there was that bumper sticker that went around for a long time that said, if you're not pissed off, you're not paying attention. And I believe that. I believe if you open your eyes, and I think that this goes back to the theory of change. I think there's 4 steps in my theory of change, and it's actually simple to say and excruciatingly difficult to enact. But you have to open your eyes, you have to pay attention. You can't make change without paying attention and really understanding the world and trying to understand it better and better. You're never going to fully understand it. You're a finite being in an infinite and expanding universe, but you can try every day to get up and say, what's the situation? What do I need to know more about? And you should ask yourself, what am I learning new every day, every week, and so on? So you have to open your eyes. Then you have to be astonished. And by that, I mean, you have to be astonished at both the beauty and the ecstasy and the joy and the human possibilities everywhere. And you also have to be astonished at the unnecessary suffering that human beings visit on each other. You have to be astonished that that can go on. You can't get used to seeing homeless kids on the streets of Chicago. You have to be astonished. You have to be horrified. And the more we get used to the inexcusable, the less likely we are to have any agency whatsoever. But so open your eyes, pay attention, be astonished. Then you have to act. You have to do something. And often my students say to me, but I can't do everything. Nobody asks you to do everything. Do something. And then do something with someone else. And then do the next thing. But you don't have to do everything. Nobody can do everything. but we can do something. And if you think you can't do anything, you're wrong. You can always do something. Even in 1984, even in Brave New World, there's something you can do. And so the question is figuring out with your friends, your family, your chosen family, what can we do? And then the fourth step is you have to doubt. So here's the rhythm. Open your eyes, pay attention, be astonished, act, doubt, repeat. So what I mean by doubt is that means reflect on what you just did and remind yourself it wasn't all that great, and you didn't do everything right, and you did some things that were really messed up, and you hurt people's feelings, and you were stupid, and your tactics didn't communicate what you meant to communicate. What a jerk you are. And then go back to the beginning, forgive yourself and start over. Open your eyes, pay attention, be astonished, act, doubt, repeat. But I started by saying, open your eyes. And I said, if you're not pissed off, you're not paying attention. But I would add to that, that if you're only pissed off, you're not going to get to where you want to go. You cannot make the kinds of changes that need to be made if you're only angry. You have to be angry enough to get up in the morning and do something, but you have to temper that anger with generosity, forgiveness, love, grace, all those feelings that we want our society to think about when we think of the poor people in our country, or we think of the men locked up in prison where I teach, or we think of the women who are living on the streets of Chicago, or we think of the refugees who are coming to Canada and the United States and Europe. And I could say a word about, I will say a word about those folks. One of the things that's just so irritating in the United States, and I just don't know what's going on in Canada, but the various refugee crises that we face, seasonally all the time. We're always in crisis about refugees. But the thing that's so maddening about it is that even well-meaning people will repeat, as if they've been hypnotized, they'll repeat, well, people are crossing the border seeking the American dream. And every time they say that, I want to scream. Nobody's seeking the American dream. They're trying to get out of a place that you crushed. They're trying, the refugees in the United States, refugees in Greece, refugees in England are escaping. They are the harvest of empire. They are the harvest. You take Venezuela, everybody in Chicago is freaking out because we have busloads of Venezuelans showing up. Interesting fact. I don't know why I'm going off on this tangent, but so forgive me, but I'll finish it up. Interesting fact. 40,000 Ukrainians were settled in Chicago. Nobody said a bad word about it. Why is that? Well, the federal government passed a law called the Ukrainian Relief Act. Every Ukrainian who comes to Chicago has a work permit, a voucher, a place to live, a family to support them. That's how you do it. If you want to be humane about people coming, you do that. But when Venezuelans come in, why are Venezuelans coming? Well, the United States froze $60 billion of Venezuelan assets in the United States. Citgo Gas is owned by the Venezuelan government. So we destroyed the economy of Venezuela besides the attempted coups, and Venezuelans can't live. So they're coming to where they might be able to get something to eat and a job, right? But it's not because they're seeking the American dream, it's they're escaping war, environmental collapse, the collapse of their economy, and so on. So that's enough of that. Sorry. But you get my point. You get my point. So you say, what's keeping me up at night? Everything's keeping me up at night. What gives me hope? I guess what I would say is my mother was an optimist and a Pollyanna, and I think I have some of that genetic material left over, but I'm not an optimist, because an optimist, like a pessimist, is a deterministic thinker. They think it's already laid out. So you guys know, all of you know somebody who's just sunny and can't stop smiling and stuff. And they don't have any real reason to, but they just think it's all going to work out. My mother used to say, no matter what I would say to my mom, she'd say, it'll work out. And, she was a privileged person. It always did work out for her, which often, pissed me off. But it won't always work out. No, it won't. But then there are the other side of it, are the determinists who say, oh, the world's going to hell and you can't do anything about it. And the cynics sit on the couch and smoke a joint and watch the world go to hell. I'm not an optimist. I'm not a pessimist. I choose to be hopeful as a politics. It's a political choice. And the reason I'm hopeful is because, I've lived through a lot of different things, but I can tell you the moment before every revolution I've ever seen, the day before it happened, every talking head, every commentator, every pundit said it's impossible. And the day after, every commentator, every pundit, every talking head said that was inevitable. They can all explain why the civil rights movement happened. I was there before it happened. And everybody's saying it could never happen, but it happened. And after it happened, everybody said, oh, that was inevitable. It wasn't inevitable, but it did happen. So I'm hopeful because I don't know what the hell's going to happen next. If I knew, I'd be an optimist or a pessimist, but I don't know, and neither do you, and neither does anybody. So other people are predicting, and not only silly things like who's going to be the next Speaker of the House.
I thought you were gonna be.
Yeah, well, I've nominated myself, but it hasn't gone that far yet. But I mean, those kind of things, not only can you not predict that, but more importantly, you cannot predict what's going to happen in the next 2 years around the gathering momentum, for example, in Illinois, to get rid of prisons. We have a very strong movement in Illinois with a lot of different organizations and different people and different who are trying to really, really close the last 4 juvenile prisons in Illinois. We've done away with cash bail in Illinois. Nobody thought that was possible. If you don't know what cash bail is, you have to pay money to get out of jail if you've been charged with certain crimes. And it's an obscenity. I could explain it to you, but we got rid of that in Illinois. Nobody thought that was possible. We abolished the death penalty in Illinois. Nobody thought that was possible. And now we are on the verge of creating a really powerful, powerful mass movement that is going to change the way we think about punishment and discipline. And I think that's an exciting thing. That gets me up in the morning. I'm also just finishing a book. Actually, I just finished it, and it'll be out in the spring. And it has a catchy title, but I don't think it's small enough to fit on Twitter or X. But the title is "When Freedom is the Question, Abolition is the Answer." And so it's 8 essays about freedom. So that's taken up a lot of my energy and time. And I really love doing it because I think that, the politics of abolition is also a good thing. And I can explain that if you're interested.
Sure. Do you want to give us a small piece of that? Or
I'll give you
Okay.
one little small thing.
all right.
You guys have heard the concept of prison abolition, right? And police abolition and things like that. Have you heard these things bandied about? They're very much talked about in the United States. If you told me 20 years ago or 15 years ago that people like CBS News and the New York Times would have a conversation about abolishing prisons, I would have thought you were out of your mind. But here we are, and we are talking about it, and it's thrilling to me. But short version, I have a friend who edits a journal in Chicago called Truth Out. Some of you might know Truth Out. It's an online journal. And the publisher, Maya Shenwar, was talking to me last year, and she said that she was reading a book to her 4-year-old about the grandmas who were trying to guard the water in Indian Territory, and I believe it was actually in Canada. And she had this little children's book, and it was about Indigenous women fighting to defend the water and to stop an oil pipeline. So she read this little book. It's a kid's book. She read it to her kid. And the kid, at the end of the book, the kid said, I want to go join the grandmas. I want to join the picket line with the grandmas. And Maya said, well, would you carry a sign? Yes, I would carry a sign. What would the sign say? The sign would say, no pipelines. Now, what I loved about that is a 4-year-old doesn't have to think about carbon trade-offs or the pipeline shouldn't go here, it ought to go there. The kid gets it automatically. He's an abolitionist. No pipelines. That's simple. Now, we have to work from there to figure out what that would mean in practical terms, but he's a natural abolitionist, just like kids are natural anarchists, which is why I love being with them. They get it that we ought to build a classroom or a daycare center or a family of mutual care, where we take care of people who come at us with different conditions, where we are experimental and where we try to do well, but we know we make mistakes. We're not saints, we're not gods, we're ordinary human beings trying. But so to me, what abolition means as a politics is it's allowing yourself to let your freedom dreams go wild and to think, what kind of a world would I like to live in? And then to try to figure out the building blocks of building that world where, for example, slavery is not a possibility. Now, that seemed crazy in 1840. And but truthfully, in order to get rid of slavery, you had to do world building work. And not just get rid of slavery. It was, how do you build a world where slavery is unthinkable, where slavery is not possible? And the same is true for prisons. How would we build the world? How can we imagine a world where, prisons was at the end of a road, not the beginning of every time we think about wrongdoing, we think about the prisons. The first time, I'll tell you, the first time I mentioned prison abolition, and I had learned about it long ago from friends, from comrades, from Angela Davis, from Erica Miners, from my partner Bernadine Dorn. And these were all people who were talking about abolishing prisons. And this was 25 years ago. So I gave a speech in Pittsburgh many years ago at an educational conference. And one of the things I talked about was doing away with prisons. And the first question on the floor was, "You're kidding, right?" And I said, "No, I think we actually could do away with prisons." "Well, how would we do it?" "Well, let's think about it." And next question was, "But you don't really mean that we wouldn't have prisons, do you?" And the funny thing about that is, it's easier to imagine the end of the world, because we've all seen it on TV and in the movies, than it is to imagine the end of prisons, right? Because prisons are just a natural part of our lives. So I said, "No, I really do mean it." And the next question was, "Well, what about John Wayne Gacy?" And if you don't know John Wayne Gacy, he was a mass murderer in Illinois who was the third guy executed once Illinois reinstated the death penalty in the 80s. And he said, "What about John Wayne Gacy?" And I said, "Okay, I'll give you one prison cell. And I'll even give you George Bush and Dick Cheney." Okay, now we have 3 prison cells, but not 2 million prison cells. You see? And so the question is, what would you have to do? What kind of world would we live in where prisons were either unthinkable or not the first choice of what to do with what we consider disposable people? And so in Pittsburgh, I did this, and I've done it ever since. Let's brainstorm 1,000 steps towards doing away with prisons. And you could start with no guns in the community. You can move from there to restorative justice programs. You can move from there to full employment, to childcare, to healthcare. You could go on, and you could think up off the top of your head, you could think up 100. And if you worked at it, you could think of 1,000 things we ought to be working toward if we wanted to do away with prisons. But prisons are so much a part of the common sense of American society. But I remind people, so was slavery. And slavery was so much a defining part of American society that no matter whether you owned slaves or didn't, no matter whether you were an abolitionist or a Democrat, it didn't matter. The point is, everyone had accommodated themselves to slavery in one way or another. We all lived it, and you could either oppose it or you could be indifferent to it. And I remind myself every day that the opposite of moral is not immoral. The opposite of moral is indifferent. You don't pay attention, you don't notice, or you don't care. That's the opposite of moral. And so too many of us are indifferent to the suffering of people all around us. And frankly, one of the things I'm absolutely on fire about, because I teach in prison, is that I cannot, just as I can't stand the mythology of people are seeking the American dream, I can't stand the mythology of that my guys who I teach are the worst of the worst. They are not the worst of the worst. There is no such category as the worst of the worst. When we have the death penalty in Illinois, that was for the worst of the worst. Now the people I teach are doing what we call death by incarceration. They're supposed to never get out. I'm determined that they're going to get out in my lifetime, but the state doesn't see it that way at this point. So there's a lot of work to do. But I want to change that narrative. If you don't know people in prison, you don't know who they are. So a lot of my effort as a teacher is to get their writing and their art and their photography out into the world. So I'll tell you one quick story. If you can bear it, can you bear one more quick
Yeah,
story?
for
Okay.
sure.
So I teach in a degree granting program. We grant a college degree, and we have 10 graduates of our college program. They get a degree from Northeastern Illinois University in a program called College Unbound, and we offer college degree. We offer college courses. They have to write a capstone paper. They have to do all the requirements to get a college degree. The last commencement that we had 5 guys graduate. We convinced the prison that each guy should be allowed to bring 10 family members. So we had 50 family members in the auditorium. That was a big concession on the part of the prison. We convinced them we convinced them they should bring 10 people. Then the program decided that the gift that we would give to each of the graduates was a full large portrait of himself painted by a Chicago portrait artist wearing the clothes that he wanted to wear. And then we made 50 postcards of each portrait and gave those to the family as a gift. So each family got 50 postcards, each guy got a portrait. But as one of my students said to me, the irony is I can't even take that damn portrait to my cell. I can't even put it up in my cell. So the family has the portrait, but 50 postcards that they can send to friends and so on and so on. And the commencement speakers were Angela Davis, Gina Dent, and Fred Moten. I don't know if you know Fred Moten, but I'll tell you a word about Fred. And the entertainment was Chance the Rapper. So we had the most amazing, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. We had 10 faculty members, 50 family members, 5 graduates in robes, a couple of state legislators, Chance the Rapper, Angela, Gina, and Fred. And it was extraordinary. Fred Moten got up. Now, do you know who Fred Moten is? He's a critical theorist. Do you know him, Mark, at all?
No, not as much, no.
Okay, he's like, I can understand every third sentence that Fred writes. He's an African-American guy. He's 60 years old, a big guy, teaches at NYU. And I thought he's going to give some esoteric critical theory speech that nobody's going to understand. It was the best speech I've ever heard at a graduation. He began by saying, I'm going to start my talk over and over, but let me start this way. I'm so happy to be here with you today. He looks at the 5 guys. He says, this is as happy as I've been in all year. And I want to thank you for that. I'm so happy to be here. He says, let me start again. I am so unhappy to be here with you today. I don't want to be here. I want to be somewhere else. And you are not broken. This system is broken, and we need you to help heal this world. And I'm so unhappy to be here. He goes on to talk about Shakespeare and one thing and another. And he ended with a poem by the great African-American poet who died too young, was a friend, June Jordan. And the poem is on Bell's theorem it's the coolest poem. And he recites this poem at the end of his talk. And his whole talk was about making links between the inside and the outside. And the poem is 3 lines, and it says, there is no chance that we will fall apart. There is no chance, and there are no parts. And that was how he ended the thing. And people were just so moved by, mostly moved by the guys who talked. All 5 of them spoke. And then I should tell you, this happened 6 months ago, and we now have a think tank that we meet with the graduates, because there's this kind of postpartum moment where they have their degree. You all will find this when you get your master's degree or PhD. Suddenly, holy cow, I've got this degree. Now what? But these guys, they worked so hard to get a college degree, and they come out, and now what do? They formed themselves into a group. They call themselves the 115 Collective. 115 is the number of years they've done collectively. And they are trying to figure out as a group, what can we do now to make a contribution to other guys who are in here and to people on the outside. So my friend Ronaldo Hudson and I went down to the think tank a couple of weeks ago. Ronaldo did 38 years in Illinois prisons, and he did 13 years on death row. He was on death row until we abolished the death penalty. He got out. He was commuted from death row by Governor Ryan, and he was commuted from prison by Governor Pritzker. So he's been out for about 4 years, and he does a lot of really, really important work, and he's a really brilliant guy. But what Ronaldo says again and again is, I like the Second Chances program. I think that's great. Everybody deserves a second chance. But you should know that not one person that I met in Stateville ever had a first chance or a fair chance. So where was my first chance? I went to prison at 17. I was illiterate. I was homeless. I was without a family. I was living in a sewer of violence. Where was my chance? He said, I went to prison at 17. No one said to me then, and no one said to me over the next 38 years, what do you need? Nobody said, what do you need? It's a simple thing to say. Most of us human beings say that to each other. But I was in an institution. Nobody said, what do you need? He said, the second thing is, I love the Innocence Project. I think we should get wrongfully convicted people out of prison. But I was not innocent. I did exactly what they said I did. And I was wrong. It was horrible. I deserve to be punished. And then what? Am I a human being? I am a human being. I'm still a human being, and so are you. And if you can't see me as a human being, you've lost some of your humanity. And I think those messages are what drive me these days, to try to do better, and to try to do, I feel like I don't want this to go on the way it is. And we live in a carceral state. People talk about the school to prison pipeline. I'm sure y'all have talked about that. My friend Dave Stovall calls it the school to prison nexus. And he's trying to make it a more intimate kind of grip. If the whole point of school is to teach you obedience and conformity, and the whole point of teaching you to read is so you can be duped, well, that's a mess. That's not what we are about, you and me. We're about teaching freedom. Well, what does it mean to teach freedom? I mean, teaching freedom means things like, like emphasizing the arts of liberty. I mean, I would think institutions in a free society, even a society with just a few aspirations toward freedom, take Canada or the United States, but any institution in a free society would follow a path with a distinct set of values, designed specifically for free people. So, for example, initiative and courage would be applauded. Imagination and creativity would be nourished. Nonconformity and noncompliance would be respected. That's not the schools I know. Ingenuity and enterprise would be nurtured. Dissent and disagreement would be encouraged, and so on. So we have in Chicago, Chicago is such a cool place. I'm trying to convince you all to move here. But we have in Chicago the headquarters of the American Library Association. The ALA elected its first Black president last year, Black woman named Tracy Hall, who's a dynamo. And she has two projects. One is she's fighting Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and all the book burners. And she's loud and she's noisy, and she's certain that we have to, and her slogan in that fight is free people read freely. And I like that slogan, free people read freely. And, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but her second program is getting a library in every prison and jail in the United States. I love that. I mean, I think that that's so so wonderfully focused of her. But this idea of, again, getting back to the thing I started with about whether this is a time of darkness or a time of light, a time of despair, a time of hope. The censorship is a really serious thing in the United States. Banning books is everywhere, and the problem with banning books, when Ron DeSantis does a noisy banning of Kianga Taylor's books, that doesn't mess with or Toni Morrison ban ban The Bluest Eye. That's not going to hurt Toni Morrison. What that hurts is the high school teacher in Des Moines, Iowa. That's who gets hurt, because you begin to self-censor. You begin to say, well, I don't want to cause trouble. And the local school board, let's just take the book out, because this happens all the time. And that's the power of book burning and censorship. So I think that we can get discouraged by that, but then we should also notice that banned book clubs are popping up in all over the country. Banned book clubs started by students. And if you're, I think teachers, librarians, publishers are in the front line in this struggle, and you all should be noisy. You should support each other. You should link arms and have a banned book reading group. I guess it's not the same problem in Canada, right?
Well, we're banning genders instead.
I see.
We have our own problems with gender right now. In Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan government is using a notwithstanding clause to not listen to the courts, who have told them that their policy that teachers have to report on the gender of kids to the parents. The courts have said that that's wrong. Like, our court has already ruled on that, saying this has to granted an injunction. Our premier has recalled the legislature, like they're on holiday. He recalled them. They're at recess. He's recalled them to pass a notwithstanding clause, which in our charter, to guarantee the adoption of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, provinces can overrule the charter and the courts for 5 years at a time. And he's using that sort of nuclear weapon of law to force teachers to have to kind of out kids. That's what we're dealing with over here. But
I thought you guys, see, I have a stereotype about Canadians. I think you're all nice and sweet and kind and gentle to each other. But I guess you have your own troglodytes. One of the things that I return to again and again is the Mississippi Freedom Schools during the Civil Rights Movement. And the reason they're important to me is that they developed, I don't know, you probably don't know much about these, but during the Civil Rights Movement, a young volunteer with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee named Charlie Cobb proposed that we build freedom schools throughout the South. And the idea was that the way Charlie put it is, and now we could transpose this right now to Canada and to South Chicago or East LA. But what he said is, the Black people of Mississippi have been denied many things: decent facilities, forward-looking curriculum, fully trained teachers. But the fundamental injury is they've been denied the right to think for themselves about the circumstances of their lives and how they could be otherwise. Just think of that. What a mind-blowing thing to say in Mississippi in 1963. The kids have been denied many things, but the fundamental injury is the right to think for yourself about the circumstances of your life and how it could be otherwise. That generated a whole movement of freedom schools throughout the South, which I was really, really privileged to be able to be involved with. But think about applying that today. So, well, first of all, to know how revolutionary that actually was, it's worth remembering that three of the well-known martyrs of Mississippi were three freedom school teachers who were kidnapped. They were jailed initially and then released into the night, where they were kidnapped by the Klan and murdered. But that was Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were the three freedom school teachers who were killed in 1963 by the Ku Klux Klan for having the audacity to say you have the right to think for yourself about the circumstances of your life and how they could be otherwise. And we developed a whole freedom school curriculum, which you can find online. It's called the 1964 Mississippi Freedom School Curriculum. But What the curriculum is a curriculum of questions, and it's a pedagogy of dialogue. And this is stuff that's familiar to you, a curriculum of questions. The first questions were, why are you and I in the freedom movement? What do we hope to change? What do we hope to accomplish? What do we want to keep that the majority culture doesn't have? What do we want to have that the majority culture has? These kind of questions they weren't right answer questions. They were questions that drive you to discover your own agency. Now, I'm thinking of this, Mark, this came to mind because of the gender nonsense. So we have a reactionary politician in the United States, not one, we have millions, but we have one I mentioned, a guy named Huckabee, who ran for president a few years ago. He was the governor of Texas, of Arkansas, I'm sorry, and his daughter is now the governor of Arkansas. Huckabee was a very large man, and he lost a tremendous amount of weight, and he became kind of the poster child for dramatic weight loss. And one of his campaigns was a campaign against childhood obesity. That seems to be fine, right? Except that the state of Arkansas put in the report card that you took home to your parents, you had your math grade, your English grade, your history grade, and your body mass index. They actually, teachers were taking the body mass index of their children. So you get an A in English, a B in history, and you're fat. And what are you supposed to do with that, right? So what was amazing was that a couple of really smart teachers in Arkansas said, let's do a freedom school curriculum on that question. Let's not give a speech about why that's messed up. Let's instead do an inquiry. And so they began to ask questions like, what is the state of our physical education program in this inner city school? What are we living in a food desert? Who owns the who owns the franchise for our lunchroom and our snack bar? Do we eat healthy food? Do we have apples in the vending machines? And they did this kind of inquiry, and it all led to a really great kind of very invested project of trying to figure out what was going on. That's freedom school, and that's the kind of social justice teaching that anyone can do. And so you could do the same thing with your thing. What's the relationship? I mean, what is the role of school for free people in a free society? And what is how do we look at the question of gender? And how should we, I'm not generating good questions, but I'll give you one other example real quickly, and you can adapt this to any. The great thing about the freedom schools was they were not only a pedagogy of dialogue and a curriculum of questions, but they were also very invested in understanding the society we lived in. It wasn't abstract. It was all inquiry into the real world. So I'll give you one other, I could give you many, but I'll give you one other example that comes to my mind. My brother, Rick, who was a legendary teacher in Berkeley High School, one day he was he taught English, but he also taught the journalism class. And he came to class one morning and he said, did you all see the obituary on Sunday of a 16-year-old girl who died 2 blocks from our high school? And of course, the kids, we don't read the obituary, Mr. Ayers, you're old. That's why you read it. But anyway, he brought this obituary in, and it turned out that this young woman who died from a space heater accident in a single residency occupancy hotel. And she had a South Asian name, an Indian name. So the kids, 2 of the kids, said, well, let's find out. And they began investigating who this girl was. There was nothing about her in the obituary except her name and where she lived. They began going into the South Asian community and asking around. And within 3 weeks, they had uncovered the largest trafficking operation in California of Indian women to low-end jobs in California. And this was 2 high school kids with a teacher who had the wisdom to ask the question. And they pursued it, and then they had to turn it over to law enforcement because they're just kids, right? But what was interesting was that they were approached by they won the biggest journalism awards in California. I asked one of the kids the next year she was going to major in journalism in college. She said, no, I already won the biggest award. I'm going to major in justice. So anyway, it was funny, but what was interesting was it led to one thing, led to another thing, led to another. So Hollywood offered them $20,000 for their story, and they debated it endlessly about whether they should do it. And then they ended up settling for $30,000, $10,000 for each of the girls who had uncovered the story so they could put it in the college fund, and $10,000 to go to the girls' home village back in India. And then they had to realize that, oh shit, if we drop $10,000 into that village, that's pandemonium. So they had to go to the UN and work through. I mean, what an education. That's 2 years of real education coming out of agency, coming out of empowerment. Not that my brother empowered them, but they empowered themselves by pursuing their own questions, their own interests, their own desires. And that's the lesson.
Always inspirational, and you always give us lots to think about. Can we ask a couple of questions, you think? Could you have time?
Please,
Or...
I'm dying for you to ask questions so I can take a breath. Go ahead.
All right, who wants to
But Mark, one thing is,
Yeah.
I don't hear so well when people walk away from the mic. So take the mic with you, or the machine, or whatever you've got.
Oh yeah, maybe you could come up, because I can't move
That's a
this.
good way to do it. Yeah, have people come up.
All right, we got them only for a little while here, so if you want to ask a question, don't be shy and come up. I know about wait time, but we already practiced questions. Come on, let's go.
I feel like I've put them all to sleep.
No, you haven't at all. Everyone's so nodding and laughing. Are you about to get up?
Oh, I can.
There we go.
I don't,
Oh, it's here.
I don't want to sound redundant. I just want to know what advice you'd give to teachers who are dealing with parents who, like we've mentioned so many issues tonight, right? So if we're teaching something in class and we have parents reaching out, like, why are you teaching this? You shouldn't be teaching this in a school. You're grooming my child. What advice do you give to those teachers and how to deal with parents?
It's obviously a very tricky thing. And, one of the things is that because the right wing in the United States, certainly it sounds like in Canada too, has been on the rise around these gender questions, certainly around race in the United States. So one parent can object to a book, and the school or the teachers collapse in the face of that one parent, and every other kid is denied it. Do you know the book Persepolis, for example? Have anybody, some of you? It's a brilliant graphic novel about the Iranian Revolution, written by a French Iranian woman named Marjane Satrapi. And it was banned in the Chicago public schools. Why was it banned? Because one parent objected to one frame in a book-length graphic novel where a boy is peeing in the street and you can see his penis. And so the parent objected, and the school system took the book out. And so I did what I always do. I went to the private school where all the elite kids go to school, and I said, do you have Persepolis? Oh yes, we have 12 copies, one in the original French, and all 7th graders are required to read it. Holy crap. So the rich kids get real art and real literature, and the kids in Chicago public get one more hour of drill and kill. So what's my advice? 2 things. One is, you're not alone, and you shouldn't collapse in the face of disagreement. We have to be smart in explaining why these things matter. For sure, the kid whose mother objected to Persepolis, that kid found another way to read it. So she wasn't protecting the kid. I mean, you were this way too when you were a kid. You read what you wanted to read. You didn't listen to the people who told you couldn't. My 15-year-old granddaughter told me she just read Lolita. Don't read Lolita. What's wrong with you? But she found it. She wanted to read it, so she read it. That's the nature of kids and getting around it. But I'd say 2 things really. One is that we can't stand alone. We have to argue articulately with evidence that freedom requires access to all kind of materials. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. You can critique it, but you have to have access to it. So we have to make that argument much more clearly, much more articulately with evidence. And I suggest, if you were in the United States, I'd suggest going to the ALA, the American Library Association, which has all kinds of helpful material, how to talk to parents about controversial topics. That's one. Second thing is, when you teach upper grades, it's a little different than when you teach young kids. But we tend to, as kids go through school, teachers tend to get further and further removed from the parents. That's a mistake. I think that we ought to, the kindergarten teacher, the first grade teacher has a good rapport with the parents. You're in touch. You're talking about what's going on. By the time you get to high school, that's pretty much ended. And I think partly parents get frustrated and say, well, I don't know, it's your job. But my brother, as I referenced my brother a minute ago, Rick, who's a legendary high school teacher in Berkeley, Rick did what any good kindergarten teacher does. He sent a note home to parents every week. Every Friday, parents knew that their kid was going to have in their backpack a note from Mr. Ayers in which he talked about what they were doing, in which that's a lot of work, right? But he was not going to sit idly by and be distant from his parents. He also practiced a very unusual thing, which is he wanted to do home visits in the first 2 weeks of school. He built relationships with parents. So the great thing about Rick, one of the great moments with Rick was he decided to teach. What was the book he decided to teach? There was a play, an ancient Greek play. I've just gotten it lost in my mind, but it was a play from one of the great old Greeks. It was coming to the Berkeley Repertory Theater. So he wanted to read it, and he wanted to read it with his English class. And so what he did is he sent a note home to the parents right in the beginning of the year saying, we're going to read this play. We're then going to go see it at Berkeley Rep. I invite you to come with us to see it. I want to warn you that this play has some pretty terrible stuff in it. And, it makes Pulp Fiction look light compared to what's going on here. Cannibalism and revenge murders. And this is true in Shakespeare, and, it's true everywhere. It's true in the Bible. If you want to get serious about stories that are filled with crazy things. But so he told them what was coming. Then he said, anytime you have a problem, I've got copies of the book in the public library. I've got them at the bookstore. I'll give you my copy. I want you to read along with us because it is a tough book to read, but I'm going to read it with your kids, and I think we'll get a lot from it. He discovered that, you don't teach a play by having kids read it like you read a novel. You read aloud. So they read the play aloud in class over the course of a semester. What a great, great thing. But notice he didn't passively wait for some parent to say, wait a minute, are you kidding? There was, this went on and this went on. So that's my basic advice is be a collective in your school, but also build relationships with the parents. Don't wait until that moment comes. And is that going to solve the problem? No, but I think it goes some distance toward addressing the problem. It doesn't solve it because there are always going to be people who, but I one of the things I like to do when people get into, I don't know how much but in Florida, they've decided to not read Shakespeare, in the high schools because it's too gruesome and too many bad things happen. So they're reading a revised Shakespeare with the bad stuff taken out. It's crazy to me, but that's the world we're living in. And I think we have to make a better argument to parents. The other thing I would do, honestly, is, I know that most of us were raised on Bible stories. Those of us who were raised in Christian family were raised on Bible stories. Read the Bible. It's got it's got all that stuff in it. It's got incest. It's got murder. It's got, everything. It's all there. So
Florida banned Shakespeare for the violence, but the school shootings and things just
exactly.
factor in.
Exactly. That's what's so wacky. But I don't know if this is helpful, but I really do think that our best shot, our only hope really is that through evidence, through argument, through persuasion, that we can build enough of a spirit of, of freedom that we don't collapse in the face of one objection to one out of context thing.
So maybe in the spirit of trying to continue this dialogue by recognizing that we have finite amount of time and the class is going to end in a bit, and we got your time, and short of our field trip to Chicago, I maybe two last questions, and then we'll thank Bill, and maybe we could organize this field trip to Chicago. No.
Please, you can all stay with me. Did you tell them about coming to Chicago and seeing Rage? Did you tell them?
Oh
that?
yeah, I did. Yeah, I stayed at Euros.
Yeah, but did you tell them who you saw?
No, I didn't. I don't know. I don't want to. They don't know anything about my private life.
I want to tell you, Mark, that we just spent the weekend at Mary Morello's 100th birthday party.
Oh, you
And-
did?
Yeah, and this is Tom Morello's mother, and we had a great time in LA, and it was just a nice gathering. And slowly people get up and sang. So Jack Black sang and Adam Sandler sang, and then it all ended with Ziggy Marley leading us all in one love
Oh,
to
nice.
this 100-year-old woman. It was fantastic, really fantastic.
Did you tell Tom I want to get you and Tom here to have a talk?
I told him, and he said, "See my agent."
See, oh yeah, we don't have that kind of money, but
I know. You can afford me easily. I'm a cheap
Right.
date for sure.
that's why I love you so much. The last two
Well, that-
questions. Thanks, Bill.
One of the things that I appreciated that you brought up, because I was thinking about it before, was what are your perspectives on police presence in schools? And whether it's for like lockdown procedures or for surveillance in certain communities, I think that there's like a conflict between the two kind of classes. There's socioeconomic situations where some students will get the finger when the police drive by, and some people will be like, that's my dad. So how would you combat, or what are your perspectives on police presence?
I think it's in Chicago, it's been a disaster. And I tend to think that, it's a weird thing. And again, it's hard to kind of translate the American experience because it's so uniquely weird and bad. Kids in the South Side of Chicago feel that they are in an occupied territory. They feel that they're under surveillance. They feel that they've been criminalized. That's why you see these incidents that make it into the news where a kid is stopped by the police and he runs. Why did he run? In my little suburb, people don't run. Why would he run? Well, because he feels that he's already been criminalized. He's already assumed to be a criminal. And we have enough evidence again and again and again in the United States of kids being shot for no other reason that they, that they're a Black kid. I can't tell you the number of people I work with and friends of mine. A very close friend of mine got stopped two weeks ago because of a tail light, and one thing led to another. He ended up doing 20 hours in county jail, and it's just outrageous. So no, I don't think police should be in the schools. The schools are a place for free inquiry, where of all the things that you want to know about school, of all the messages you want to send to your kids, is that you have every right to be here and you need no one's permission to interrogate the world. You need no one's permission. You don't need Governor DeSantis. You don't need me. You don't need your mom. You can interrogate the world all by yourself. And we should do it together if possible, but you don't need me to do it. You don't need me to tell you you can do it. You can do it. When you put police in that situation, two things happen. Ordinary incidents escalate, and kids begin to feel that they are under surveillance of the armed agents of the state. That's not a good situation for learning. I often felt when I was a school teacher, a classroom teacher, I often felt that teachers 99% of the time, when we called on the principal or the assistant principal to solve our disciplinary problems, we were making a mistake. Because it's actually, I don't think, except very extreme circumstances, I don't think you need an outside force. A teacher is building a community. That community is a community of learning. That community has to run on certain kind of rules. And the rules tend to be, we are a learning community. We're here to support one another. We try not to hurt each other or each other's work. And we're here together. We are each an invaluable human being, but we are here together, working together. And so one of the curricula that I always want either hidden or explicit in my classroom is we are learning to live together. I don't want discipline. I don't want classroom management. Those are from a different world than the world I want to live in. I want to live in a world where we're learning to live together. And that means we fuck up. Oh, excuse me. I forgot. Sorry, I'm getting carried away. We mess up, and then we correct ourselves, and we try to be better. And so, some kid says, no girls are allowed in the block area, or somebody makes a racist comment. That's not a cause to call the principal. That's a cause that's a teachable moment. That's a moment when learning to live together, other work stops, and we have a conversation about learning to live together, because we do have to learn to live together. And frankly, I have found, if you call it, among my many curricula that I'm teaching a curriculum called Learning to Live Together. That's true of kindergarten, where you can see it acted out in different ways, because kids are just learning how to get along with others. And it's also true in graduate school. We're learning to live together in graduate school. Have you noticed that some people talk too much, like me, and other people don't talk enough? And that if we're learning to live together, we somehow have to develop a culture of mutual support, and that means noticing. And sometimes, one of the things that's funny about privilege is we don't notice things. So it took me a long time when I was first teaching in Illinois, in Chicago, at this urban university. It took me 2 months to recognize that when it was time to leave class at 8:30 at night, the women all gathered in the corner and the men all went to the parking lot or the train. But the women all gathered together. Why did they gather together? The answer. But so it took me 2 months to notice that was happening. And I said to one student, are all the women gathering together? And she looked at me like, duh, of course, stupid. But she didn't say it, but it was nice. She was being kind. But my privilege allowed me not to notice what was right there. Learning to live together required us to stop everything and say, look, when class is over from now on, we're all going out together. We're not going to have a gender split where the men go out because they don't feel that this is dangerous to them and the women can't go out. We're going to go together. That's learning to live together in graduate school.
Nice. Last question. Bum, 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 bum. All right.
Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I just wanted to know, what are some of the risks and challenges that you faced in your career or the work that you do, and how did you handle them?
Oh my goodness. I don't know where to start, because,
Did you ever face any risk?
well, the problem is that, a lot of them are pretty dramatic, but there's two things. One is, I think you have to know where your family is, where your love is. You can't, sometimes we complain about being in situations where we're not loved. Well, you don't expect to be loved in some of the institutions that we build. We go into teaching, most of us, as an act of love and an act of faith. And we find ourselves in institutions that aren't interested in that aren't interested in supporting us, and so on. So we have to build our own. I've had a lot of challenges, among them, being red baited in many different situations. And what did I do? I relied on the most dramatic, I guess, was during during the first Obama campaign. You probably don't know this, but do you know that? Do they know anything about that? No.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Well, I'll just tell you a quick funny story, but yeah, I had my graduate students over at my house for a potluck, just as I did tonight, and it was when Obama and Hillary Clinton were having the last debate in the 2008 primary, and George Stephanopoulos asked Obama, well, and we were having a potluck and talking about research, and then we were done and we were cleaning up and somebody turned on the television just as George Stephanopoulos said, what about your relationship with Reverend Wright? He doesn't like America and he's your preacher. And Obama answered, and they said, well, what about your relationship with this guy, Bill Ayers? He bombed the Pentagon and never apologized. And students fell on the floor. And one of my students looked at me and said, that guy has the same name as you. And one of the students said, that's because they're the same guy. In any case, that led to many, many, many months of, and really on to this day, but I mean, it's not new for me, but I mean, many months of threats and the mayor of Chicago wanted police out in front of my house and the university wanted police in my office. And just like the previous question, I don't want the police. I don't want them in my school. I don't think they had anything. But so yes, I've faced those kind of challenges, but I'll say this about that's just the most dramatic one. But every challenge that I faced like that, either from censorship or parents or censoring or censuring, I've always tried to figure out where are the people who I care about, who care about me. I can't believe the kind of public relations or the public narrative about me. That's some character that was built up for other purposes. So in the worst of times, I relied on my 3 sons, on my partner, on my brother, on a couple of very dear friends, and they kept me on course. If I was suffering, another one, even before that, I wrote a book about the years of the American war against Vietnam, and that book was published on 9/11, 2001. And I was on the front page of the arts section of the New York Times about this book, about the resistance to the Vietnam War. And I mean, again, the house fell in on me and it was really complicated. But I also always knew that the public narrative about me was not me. And I also knew that my sons, my partner, my brother, and several other people really are my family. And that's where I go for nourishment, for challenge, for love, for care, for support, for mutual support. So I guess that's my, you got to find your people and you got to know who your people are. And that can keep your head on straight when everything else is going crazy.
Thanks so much, Bill. Maximum love and respect. I so deeply appreciate all the wisdom, the experience, the putting the actions behind the theory, like you said, to begin with. And I can't thank you enough for this. Maximum gratitude.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for putting up with me. And also thank you, Mark, for inviting me. And thank you all for being teachers and for doing what I think is, in many ways, the most meaningful, the most powerful, the most potentially, we can't change the world necessarily, but we can go into the work changing ourselves and changing the people who will change the world. So I think that this is world-changing work, and we should be very proud of ourselves and not take what the public says about it or what the media says about it to heart. We should believe in ourselves, and I believe in you. So I think it's great that you're here.
Thanks so much. I continue to demand the impossible.
Right on. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks, Bill. Here's a pan real quick here.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.